from just outside the Empire City at the crossroads to the northeast. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Wherever you are and whenever you are, this is your premier podcast for all things unknown, not media, and I'm your host, JP. Welcome to Not Media. This is episode 23, and today, again, back by popular demand, I have a very special guest. Floyd Wills is back again on Not Media. Great to have him here. Floyd Wills has a Bachelor of Science degree in Human Development and holds certifications in hypnotherapy and neuro-linguistic psychology. His investigations into sacred sites and out-of-place artifacts had led him across the globe. He currently lives in Washington. Floyd is also the author of The Red-Haired Giants of Lovelock Cave and Other Ancient Mysteries. Welcome to Not Media, Floyd. Welcome back to Not Media, Floyd. How are you doing this for you, morning, for me, this afternoon?
Yeah, I'm doing good, JP. Thanks so much for having me back on. Appreciate you reaching out to me, and also appreciate your audience for tuning in. I think we're going to have a real interesting discussion on the little people. The last time I was on, we talked about giants, and now we're going on the other side with the little people. So looking forward to an interesting conversation.
Excellent. So I'm it's great to have you back here. I know last time, like you said, had a really interesting conversation with it, learned a lot. And it's just cool to see people out there doing what you're doing. You know, you have you've kind of tapped into like a unique history of the United States that falls off the radar as far as any sort of mainstream science goes, you know. And like when you hear these stories and you talk about like red-haired giants and battles with Indians with these, massive, we don't even know if we can call them Homo sapiens, but these massive, I guess, giant people with different features than as we know Homo sapiens, double rowed upper teeth, 6 fingers. And there's actually some evidence through archaeological digs to support the evidence of these people. And on the flip side now of what we were talking about with the giants, there was a chapter of your book, specifically chapter 11 from the book Red-Haired Giants of Lovelock Cave and Other Ancient Mysteries that focus on little people. And I know we were catching up a little bit before we started recording. Let me just ask you for the folks watching Not Media that, have you, since the last time that I had you on, have you done any more research? Are you leaning into any other areas of what sort of research that you are doing, or maybe thinking about writing another book or any articles or like that? So what have you been up to since the last time we spoke?
Yeah, I've just been doing more research. I went to the Serpent Mound a few years back in Ohio, the largest serpent effigy in North America.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, there's one that's very similar to it in Scotland. And this giant effigy mound is astronomically aligned. So I'm getting more interested in some of the mound building cultures. In some of my research on the giants, finding articles on the giants, there was a number of giant skeletons that were pulled out of these burial mounds in North America. So I find that really interesting. It seems like my research is going that direction.
Okay.
Also, I think since our last conversation, I've been to Oklahoma. There's a cave there that has some really interesting carvings in it.
Okay.
Possibly Ogham carvings, ancient Celtic writing, Egyptian symbols. They call it Anubis Cave because there's a carving of Anubis in the cave. And during the solstice and different times of the year, light will shine in the cave and will hit specific symbols in the cave.
Okay.
So I've always been interested. A lot of research into pre-Columbian contact here in America. Long before Columbus, I believe there was a lot of other cultures that were here.
Yes.
So that's the kind of the area I've been doing a lot of research in lately.
Yes, there definitely is. I think we were talking about that out in the Southwest, maybe from some of your book. I know you just covered so many details, but like there was definitely symbolism or signs. I think certain types of ruins that were seen in other parts of the world that were out in the Southwest. So there's really no way.
Absolutely.
There's no way to quantify or like say, like, or if there wasn't some sort of seafaring, or I'm sure mainstream archaeologists would say, well, and during the last ice age, there was the ocean from Asia, I guess you'd say like Eastern Asia, and then Alaska out here, right? Wasn't there like a land bridge formed by a frozen ocean? That's what they claim. That's where the people walked over. That's how they got.
That's the standard. Yeah, that's the standard kind of MO from the archaeologists. And they'll say, yeah, they crossed this land bridge. But I think there's quite a bit of evidence that there's contact from not just that, but these ancient peoples came from Europe, and they had boat making abilities.
Yes,
and yes, and they actually sailed here.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, interesting. A lot of new evidence since that original. I think they call it Beringia theory. That you talked about with the land bridge.
Yeah.
There's plenty of evidence to say that these ancient peoples came over here other ways.
Yeah.
Rather than just walk across a land bridge to get over here.
Yes, I don't want to jump ahead too much into chapter 11, but I kind of was just looking at my notes here, and I do recall from brushing up on this, scientist Robert Benarek tested to see if he and his team could sail from mainland, because I guess they were, we'll talk a little bit more about maybe it's like some. What was it? Komodo Island, or the small people that were living off.
The Flores.
The
Isle of Flores in Indonesia. Yep.
So he was basically able to prove to sail from mainland to Komodo Island using basically a dried raft made of lashed together bamboo. And even though it was a difficult ride, he basically proved that 800,000 years ago it could have happened, and that people who how would small people be found out there, on an island? And I guess there was something called island theory, basically saying that, like, if people get if people get stranded on an island, or migrate to an island, however, throughout history, island theory is that the large mammals, because they have no food to stay large, start to shrink. So like you and I, if generations of humans, if say like 20, 30 humans went out to an island and they stayed there for 100 generations, over time they would get smaller and smaller and smaller just for lack of food. So you might, start forming a race of hobbits from, say, like Homo erectus at the time, or the other way around, smaller mammals which normally don't have enough food because they have no predators, they might get larger because now they all of a sudden they don't have any natural predators out there, and they've been so small. This is time for them to grow. So obviously, we see throughout history, millions of years ago with dinosaurs, I guess there was different balances of maybe carbon dioxide to oxygen in the air. Maybe that had something to do with it. But you had these massive, massive creatures. I mean, just the whole world was tropical back then. So, obviously, at some point in time, we had there's some amalgamation of things that are still alive on this planet were just a lot bigger. Alligators and crocodiles, whatever those ancient ones were, they were double the size they are now, or triple the size they are now. So so obviously you could see how through evolution things, mammals and reptiles do get bigger and smaller throughout time through evolution.
Yeah, you bring up some great points, JP, and definitely the atmospheric conditions of this planet were much, much different in the time of the dinosaurs to allow them to be the size that they are, right? I referenced an article in my book that basically theorized, well, like if we were able to recreate, let's say, a Tyrannosaurus Rex or a large animal, could it survive in our present atmospheric conditions? And the researchers said that it wouldn't last long because the oxygen levels have changed so much. It would be like the dinosaur, at the top of, one of the tallest mountains, breathing in, just that air, and it wouldn't have much.
He wouldn't be able to feel the muscles, all those muscles.
Yeah,
of
wouldn't be able to feel the muscles. So yeah, it wouldn't last long.
So how's he going to hunt? How's he going to chase if our T-Rex of 2025 is walking around sucking air every 5 minutes he walks, catching up? You're never going to get a meal, so you're never going to survive. Yeah,
you're never gonna survive, and too, it plays into kind of the topic too we had had talked before about giants, and maybe because of the atmospheric conditions that also contributed to the size of our ancestors, and that could be a possible explanation why there were giants, in ancient times, because the atmospheric conditions were so different. But also too, you talked about the archaeologists making these primitive boats and seeing if they can sail from the mainland in Indonesia to this island called Flores Island, where they discovered in the early 2000s, in a Liangbao cave, this giant cave, archaeologists found these little skeletons. Initially, they found one, and it was about 3 feet in height, and they found all kinds of tools. They found spear points. They found skeletons of Komodo dragons and just all these different artifacts. And they couldn't figure out, this small skeleton that they found, did it have a disease? Was it a child? And then they did the dental testing and found that this individual was probably between, 20 and 30 years old.
Wow.
So it was fully grown.
Yeah.
And so they started doing extensive testing. When they initially found the skeleton, it was almost had the consistency of mashed potatoes. It was almost really mushy. So they had to very carefully remove it from the soil, and then they let it dry out, and then they put almost like a glue over the entire skeleton to keep it all together, to preserve it. So they did extensive testing, and they determined that this was a race of people, that it was a fully grown adult, and there was no diseases like microcephaly or anything like that that would make this little being that small. And what was interesting, JP, is that the brain size was they had a brain smaller than chimpanzees, and yet they had the artifacts in the cave to prove that they made arrow points, they made other tools, they knew how to make fire. They were hunting, these Komodo dragons and other animals on the island. So, I mean, when you look at it, like, this thing had a brain smaller than a chimp, but yet it had these advanced tool making skills.
Yeah, it makes
you
really
wonder. Contradicted. Yeah,
makes you wonder with humans. I know there's like a big theory going on. It's called, like, somebody dubbed it something. I forget what it was, like the Big Bang of like the brain or something, like 55 to 60,000 years ago. And this is known through all like the UFO researchers. This is a fact that's thrown around a lot with UFO researchers. There's this unknown, like, X factor of our ancestors having this, like, within the past, I think like 150, 250,000 years. Our cerebral cortex all of a sudden exploded and got like a lot bigger, and it's really unknown why. Like, why did that happen? And like, it lines up, if you want to go like I'm not even going to use the word conspiracy, because we have like we'll say like the ancient astronaut, like the ancient, like that theory, because
that theory,
I think when you start using like these older, like, kind of like now, like, becoming more outdated words, these are words that were kind of invented to like muddy the waters, kind of, sort of. But when it comes to this sort of research, there's definitely something to be had. There's things that have gone in the past of this world, and they're absolutely inexplainable. If you look at like Pumu Punka, like, you see the 90-degree cuts and the laser-like etchings in the granite that they did on like a large industrial scale. Not possible for people in the Stone Age to do something like that. Somebody either was here on this planet, or somebody came here from somewhere else with high levels of technology and used unknown technology to like fashion these. It's impossible. Anybody who has any mind, even though I'm not an engineer, that has any clue how difficult it is to cut granite and how tight these cuts are and how perfect they are, you can kind of tell that like something did occur in the past of this. And then we know, just through like a lot of the research I've done, that modern day UFO, UAP phenomenon is real. And I believe, I'm a huge proponent that there's been a large number of crashes. They've been retrieved. So if this is going on, and the reverse engineering, if this is going on within the past 100 years, what was going on 1,000, 2,000, 10,000, 50, 100? And then, it just begs the question of, what sort of intervention has humanity had with these unknown, visitors here, and like, how do we interlace with them, and what is the dynamic of that? So, it certainly does like beg the question of this cerebral cortex Big Bang type of theory that 55, 60,000 years ago. Why Why? Because normally through evolution, this would have taken hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years to occur. How did it happen within just this blink of an eye, And like,
interesting.
Or are we, fixed or, engineered in any sort of way that, through genetics that maybe to assist, like Sitchin has a theory that like the hominids on this planet were genetically modified basically to work better, to be a better like worker race for the Anunnaki that came. So did something like that actually occur? So, but the question is it not necessarily brain size, or is it ratio of the brain to ratio of the cerebral cortex? So you're saying that, like, oh, well, this brain is smaller than a chimpanzee, but what if it's smaller than a chimpanzee, but has a larger cortex area than a chimpanzee? Would that, like, what is the mark of intelligence? Could you have a brain that's like yay big, but if it's triple the size of a cortex of our brains, then maybe that high level thinking that happens in intelligent animals and intelligent beings can take place the bigger the cortex is. So you could have a smaller being, but if just the cortex of the being is the ratio of the cortex to the stem, to the other areas of the brain that we consider like more like the reptilian areas, like the higher thinking processes can still occur, even though the thing is not, this doesn't have this giant head that you would think, like an alien should have in order to be able to like understand the inner fixings of the universe. Maybe it's that, when a culture gets advanced enough, or, they, and they're able to start maybe writing stuff down for other generations to like know, like all that stuff doesn't have to be stored in the head. You don't need a brain that's like, like yay big in order to like understand a lot. Like to get smarter, maybe just the ratio of the brain, the cortex, the forward thinking, complex thinking area of the brain. So maybe that could be a explanation for that. Like,
That's very interesting, JP. I have a replica actually of the first, they call them the Hobbits, the Flores Hobbits. And this is just to give you an idea of the scale of the skull.
Wow.
This is a replica of that first skeleton. So you can see very, very tiny. They were very small beings, not more than 3 feet tall. And here's another interesting thing, JP, is since they made the discovery of the Flores Hobbit, this was in the early 2000s, they've actually found more of these little people or hobbits in the Philippines that are actually smaller.
Oh, wow.
They're smaller. Yeah. So initially when the Flores Hobbit was discovered, they dated the first skeleton. They said, oh, this is probably around 18,000 years old.
Okay.
Which really, if that's accurate, then it's like, wow, they definitely probably had interaction with our ancestors, right?
Yeah.
They ran into them at some point, and maybe that's where a lot of these stories, these legends come from about the little people.
Yeah, the
small people, right?
Yeah.
And then they came back and they said, they did some other testing and they said, oh, no, it's not 18,000 years old. It's probably 50,000 years old or 100,000 years old, but it's still within that range where they could have very well have had interaction with our ancestors, right? So the ones in the Philippines, this is crazy. Some of those were like 2 feet high, 2.5 feet high, even smaller than the Indonesian ones.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, some of these skeletons were found near a prehistoric rhinoceros, and the rhinoceros bones had been broken up, and the marrow of the bones had been sucked out. So these little hobbits had sucked out the marrow, which contains really good protein.
Yeah.
Maybe they hunted it and killed it, or maybe they came across it and it was dead, freshly dead, and then they sucked the marrow out. And I think the rhinoceros was dated back like 700,000 years.
Now, if this was on the same, that's where it was. Yeah, Philippines. I found something called a pygmy Homo floresiensis, and then are we going back 631 to 777,000 years ago? Is that as far back that's where that was quoted? or
That's for
sighted?
the Philippines. Yeah, for the ones that they discovered in the Philippines.
And it was found in a cave in the island of Luzon, right? And then they were dated. The Hobbit was dated back to potentially 50,000 years ago. That was like a more updated number of what they.
That's for the Indonesian one, the
okay.
Flores. Yeah, we have the Flores Hobbits. Yes. So initially they said 18,000, and they did some further testing, and they said no, probably 50,000 years old, or maybe older. And then since that discovery, they found more of these hobbits in the Philippines, and they dated these skeletons, and they're smaller than the Flores hobbits. They're like 2.5 feet tall. I mean, that's tiny.
Wow,
that's very, very small.
That is small.
And I believe
even
they found tools. Yeah,
like
little people, they
found
tools.
Like somebody usually about 3.5 feet. They could consider someone like I don't know what the politically correct term now is, but like a little person. You know, I think it's like what do you have to be classified under 3.5 or 4 feet or something like that, which does look small, right. But like imagine 2.5 feet. That's like a toddler. It's like smaller than a toddler.
Very, very small. Yeah.
Now, which one of these shared features of like the Australopithecus, like the curved foot and fingers, was this the ones? So you're saying some in the book it said some of those shared the features of some of these more ancient. So Australopithecus was a giant ape, right? Like a giant gorilla?
I think that's referring to the hobbits that were discovered in the Philippines.
Okay.
Yes. So I mean, think about it. In the archaeological record, we have evidence of these little beings, 3 feet, even smaller, that once walked the earth, that were intelligent enough to make fire, to make arrow points, to make tools. They were, and to build boats also too. The ones they discovered in the Philippines, the archaeologists were saying they could have built boats. And then you were referencing the island theory, right?
Yeah.
Where, these generations are on these small islands, and, the mammals the bigger ones get smaller, the smaller ones get the bigger. However, we have reports of little people all throughout the world in all cultures and extensively in North America and the Native American cultures. So this isn't a small, a small island. So, there would be people that would kind of argue that. And say, I'm not sure if I buy the island theory.
So it was just another race, like just a different race of being. And now, what's your take? I mean, I know it's really hard to like quantify any of this, especially because it's not, it's through culture and through myth and through legend, but like all sorts of different little people, like through the Native American folklore. I mean, you have, the cannibal dwarfs. I don't even want to try to pronounce some of these names, but
I know some of the natives.
Like Hatchasietchi, and then the Afros called it Vo Estana Hesono. But there's little people, just some of the names that some of these little people, like the Akiki, Black Imps, Cannibal Dwarfs, Koi, Akunashi, Lost Elves, the Caddo Little People, the Nagum Wasuk, the Pasa, the Squanit, the Tonup. So there's all sorts of little names for these like little people. And I remember like a common theme. I thought one of them was interesting. Because I know Mount Shasta is like an area for like a lot of UFO activity. The Black Imps or the Jisoo Chin, little people from Achuami folklore. They made their homes on the slopes of Mount Shasta, and they would punish people by making trespassers become hopelessly lost, right? And then go insane. So like there's this like magical element to a lot of the culture here in the North America with these different groups of little people where they can become invisible. They have like these powers. Like, what's your take on like, maybe why? Is there any like insight into like any of these Native American cultures, if this is just something passed down through generation to generation, and or why they might believe this otherwise, these sorts of
as you mentioned, JP, I mean, most Native American tribes will have stories in their oral tradition of the little people, and they give them different names, and you read off a number of different names, and kind of the commonalities that I found when I kind of started researching little people is that you don't disrespect them, right? If you disrespect them, then bad things are going to happen. And there's definitely a supernatural element to them, as you mentioned, like the ones at Mount Shasta. And there's a lot of weird things in that area that go back, a long time, with UFOs. And I think there's a number of people like that have disappeared mysteriously in that area.
I believe one of my last guests, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, he took a trip down to Antarctica, Brad Olson. I had him on the podcast, and he was doing some research on Antarctica. I think he had written a book, and one of the sections of his book did something about Mount Shasta, like somebody went to Mount Shasta and they met some sort of like a glowing figure, and that glowing figure was like some part of some like elderly like race or something like that. It's one of those areas.
They talk about the Lemurians.
I think so.
I've heard that mention in the Mount Shasta area. The Lemurians are supposed to be some
ancient
lost race.
Yeah. And they're all like very enlightened, and they brought this one person there, and they wanted to he was like an elder, and he wanted to say hey, this is the way, or so I think it was Mount Shasta was one of the places that was quoted, but I know there's a lot of UFO activity there. I think that's where Stephen Greer and I don't know if you're familiar with the name James Gillian. I know Stephen Greer. They do this.
I've heard Stephen Greer. Yeah.
They do this thing called CE5. There's different levels of contact, like close encounters of the.
Don't they go into like a meditative state and try to summon these beings?
And apparently, from what a lot of these people who go to these, they go to these they're almost like spiritual retreats that these people go on. They go out in the mountains. Yeah. You go out there for 2 weeks. You meditate every night. You live, I think, it's very simple lifestyle. But I think ultimately every night you meditate, and you all commonly meditate on like love and drawing these beings in, and then they'll see extra UFO activity in these areas of Mount Shasta, and it's surrounding these CE5 initiatives. So it's just interesting that they also have this history of these culturalists saying these black imps. They seem like they could have a pretty wicked side to them too. They're not to be messed with.
Yep. You don't disrespect them because, like I said, there's a supernatural element. There was one race of little people that they would point their finger at you. They would point their finger, and they would almost put you in a trance, and then you would lose your bearings, and it could affect your mind. So this kind of blows me away because I've also been doing some research lately into the Bigfoot, into Sasquatch. I've met four or five people within the past few years that have had direct encounters with Sasquatch in my area. And one old newspaper article I found on the Sasquatch, it talked about this Native American tribe. I believe it's in Washington State, my home state where I live. And they said that they said they were a tribe. They were large and they were hairy, and they had the ability to hypnotize their prey. And put their prey in a state of trance. Wow. And I thought, wow, that is so interesting, because when I was researching the little people, it talked a lot about their, like you mentioned earlier, their ability to kind of turn invisible, to blend in, but also they have these supernatural powers to mess with your mind. And I have a neighbor that had 2 encounters with a Sasquatch about an hour away from where I live. And I documented those experiences. He never had anyone document them.
Wow.
I sat with him for 2 hours. And in one of those experiences, JP, when he encountered the Bigfoot, he said he felt like it was messing with his mind. He felt like some force was trying to get into his head and manipulate him psychologically. So very, very interesting.
He just saw them, or was there like a face to face, or was it?
It was face to face. Yeah, face to face. The first encounter, it was him, his grandson, and another buddy. They were out riding 4-wheelers, and his buddy wasn't familiar. They were on these old logging roads, and he took a curve too fast and flipped over and was literally almost hanging off of a cliff, and he was all bloodied up and injured. And then my neighbor and his grandson were in process of helping him in this commotion. And Andy, my friend, looked up and he saw this giant. He said it was Floyd. He said it was probably about 8 feet tall.
Wow.
And it was gigantic. It came out from behind the tree, and it caught all of their attention, even his buddy that's bloodied up and injured. They all look up and they're looking at this thing, and his grandson he's like, Grandpa, what is that? And he goes, never forget this day. This is a day you saw a Bigfoot. And this thing takes off, and it's making these giant strides. And he said, Floyd, you could see the detail of the musculature of the buttocks when this thing moved, and it just took some big strides, and it just took off. But they all saw it, all three of them.
When you get three people who witnessed something that amazing, you really have to scratch your head. But the thing with Bigfoot, it's always been this elusive, like the argument on the scientific side is always you could see why they would think this. There's this giant mammal walking through the woods that has to be part of a breeding population of giant mammals. When is one going to turn up? When is that? But then it also crosses the line with they've been seen a lot of times with UFO activity. So we have these cryptid creatures that have been seen throughout this world.
Yep.
Even if you want to take Mothman, for example.
Yeah.
This wasn't witnessed by one person. That was witnessed by basically it for a while. There was an area where kids, would go park up in this. I remember I think they were abandoned missile silos, or this thing was seen a lot. This figure was seen a lot. This cryptid,
multiple people,
supernatural type of figure with wings, a winged figure, was seen by more than just one. Dozens of straight-laced people saw this creature. So it makes you wonder that we have so much UFO activity on this planet. Is it something that already exists inside the planet secretly? Is it something that comes here from somewhere else? But there's definitely things that are cited that they just don't have an explanation, which is why, and the more confusing part is that when you start logically thinking about, okay, well, there's this giant hominid. Eventually the thing's going to die. Eventually it's going to have a baby. Eventually something's going to get sick. It's going to get injured. There's going to be a piece of fur, a chunk of fur sitting somewhere. There's going to be some way to be able to meter what this thing is. It's going to sooner or later going to have to get caught on a camera somewhere. But yet to this point, people have these sightings, these three people witnessing some sort of a anomaly to this planet because it doesn't fit with any of the record of the history of anything that should belong on this planet, but they've seen it. And then, and then it walks off into the woods. You're like, well, where did it go? Where does it live? What does it eat? And is there a supernatural element to this where this thing is associated with maybe a group of these beings? Do they have bases under mountains? Do they have underground bases? There's a lot of questions, and a lot of, compelling information that has come forward where it comes to where might these things exist. And, I know underground bases are another big thing talked about in the UFO world. I did a whole episode on the purported Dulce base. So it's not, it's definitely not off the table if you really start looking into DUMBs, deep underground military bases, that things can exist underground, large facilities. And, especially if you're dealing with a being associated with some sort of an advanced race, that they might have the capability to be able to just, go and use whatever that technology is to assist them to, either go deep underground or maybe eventually go invisible. I don't know. You start getting into, we're not too far away from 2025 being able to have the ability in our military to cloak objects, cloak ships, cloak jets. So, imagine if there was a civilization super advanced from us, 10,000 years, what some of the technological capabilities that they would have. So, it's really hard. It's something we can only speculate on, but very interesting story that you were able to share that,
And you mentioned about the underground, about, people saying that these beings could live underground. It's interesting you say that, JP, because in a lot of the Native American traditions, they say the little people lived underground.
Yes.
In fact, there was a group of the Cherokees, they interacted with these beings. They called them the moon-eyed people, and they said they lived underground, and they were little people, and they had very, very large eyes, and they were blue, and they would only come out at night because the sunlight would hurt their eyes. And in the oral tradition of the Cherokees, they fought these moon-eyed people. and there were some violent encounters between them. But as
Oh,
you mentioned earlier too, yeah, go ahead.
it was in your notes that they believe they fought these people and they might have drove them into the mountains of Tennessee, and then you had this situation where old Woodbury newspaper in what was this? This was Tennessee. Apparently had this news article about a pygmy graveyard where there were 75 to 100,000 skeletons. That's a
lot of skeletons.
That's pretty impressive. No bigger than 3 feet in height, but it wasn't sure if this was some sort of a hoax. I mean, it's really hard to quantify something that big of a claim when you don't have anything to back it up, other than a news article.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a number of actually news articles that they came across regarding these little people, and in some of them, just like in the giant articles, it says, "Oh, the Smithsonian is going to investigate and research," and then you don't hear about anything anymore. But the way some of these skeletons are described is they said they were not more than 3 feet.
Yeah.
And here's the interesting thing: we have actual skeletons now that came out of Indonesia and the Philippines, and they weren't bigger than 3 feet in height.
Yes.
So it kind of makes you wonder. You look back and you go, "Yeah, could it have been a hoax? Yeah, possibly it could have been a hoax." However, we have in the archaeological record now these little beings that were 3 feet and smaller that were obviously intelligent and walking the earth.
For sure. Yeah, you had cited in your book that the Native Americans cited that one of the Smithsonian investigated races was the worshippers of the sun. And they were no bigger than 36 inches in length and thought to have been killed by Native Americans. And this reminds me of... Okay, so there was a group brought forward by researcher Walter Middleton, and he said that there was two kinds of little people. One was similar to Cherokees, black hair, with same type of eyes, dark complexion, and another had reddish whiskers and squinted eyes when they looked at the sunlight. Maybe something that lives underground, like they couldn't handle the sunlight. And they were a violent race. Now, I was wondering, the Cherokees may have killed this race of little people with red whiskers, and the fact that they have red hair, if there's some sort of connection with the fact that there was red-haired giants who were violent.
I know, isn't that interesting? Yeah. And these little red-haired little people oftentimes are associated with cannibalism too, which the giants, the red-haired giants that I write about, they were associated with cannibalism as well. And I believe in that article you're referencing, the gentleman that wrote the article was a researcher in that article that was referenced. He believed that the little people came. They're in the Mayan traditions, and he believes that they originated in the Yucatan Peninsula, and there was some kind of cataclysm over in that area, and they migrated into America.
Okay,
and so I got to share a story with you because I was in the Yucatan Peninsula probably 14 years ago, and I did a tour there, and I went to a Mayan village and some pyramids, and one of the stops that we went at were the cenotes. There's a lot of underground cavern systems in Mexico. Tons of them. And so this tour was led by a Mayan shaman. And before we went into these tunnels, JP, he was burning sage and some other incense and doing like a ritual. And I'm like, well, what is this? And he goes, well, it's to appease the spirits of the little people. Because we're going into their realm underground.
You don't want to disrespect them. Yeah. Wow. That's something else. Yeah, I heard... Is it because the bedrock down there? Because I was looking a while back. I mean, this is a little bit off topic, but they were saying it might be related that some researchers believe that what they dub as like the KT boundary, which was the meteor that 65 million years ago wiped the dinosaurs out, that it slammed into what is now like where the Gulf of Mexico is. And a lot of the circle of that, if you kind of trace all these caves and these circles, maybe like the Yucatan, there's like a whole like ring of caves that are all underground. They think that maybe somehow this massive impact like helped form like this circle of like where they found like this whole ring of caves on the
I haven't heard of that
crater,
before.
and then the outskirts of the crater or something like that. Yeah, like I believe. I mean, this is like something I would have read years and years ago, but I did hear there was a lot of caves down there. I don't know if it's just the bedrock,
a lot
or
of
like
cave systems.
Yeah, like why that would be. Just maybe a lot of times limestone is something that like the water can could eat out, like quicker. It's a softer rock, I guess, when it comes to like rainwater, so it could carve these caves out underground.
Yeah, so, if you ever get out to the Yucatan Peninsula, go check out some of the cenotes. They are amazing. I remember the ones that shaman took us in. It led into a huge cavern, JP, and it was probably a couple 100 feet up high, this huge cavern, and you could swim in there. There was water in there, and you could swim. And there was an opening at the very top, and there was a tree on the outside that the roots grew down several 100 feet and went into the water inside the cave. One of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
I think I've seen a picture of that before.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like a cave and like people go swimming down there, right? Like people swimming, and you can see the roots coming down into the cave.
Yes.
I'm just trying to look up. I'm not like hugely familiar with the topography of. Okay, so it would be towards like this southern part of Mexico, right, where Mexico meets Guatemala, and then the Yucatan.
I was in Cancun. Yeah, I was in Cancun, so it was
part of Mexico.
About, it was a few hours away from Cancun. It was a few hours by bus. Away, but I guess the cenotes are all over. They are all over.
Cool.
So if you ever get a chance, you got to go check it out. It's pretty amazing. But I thought it was so interesting that the shaman was basically saying, this is the realm of the little people.
Yes.
This is where they live.
Yes. So it's more than I guess if it's embedded deeply in the culture there, where like somebody like a shaman is going to bring it up as part of their tradition. That it's hard to quantify like something when you're going back in history, but like usually where there's like they say where there's smoke, there's fire. I know there's stuff.
I believe
there's stuff as myths, and I know people do make things up, and there's tall tales. But like sometimes there's a kernel of truth to the reason why people tell these tales, and why there's tradition held forward generation after generation, where a shaman's going to be burning, like you said, sage or some sort of type of plant to say a special prayer to appease these beings that might be living down inside these caves, these cave systems.
Yep.
Something that I didn't see in your book that I wanted to ask you about. I mean, we'll get back into the book. I don't know if you remember anything about this. There was a small being, and this was like big held up in the world of UFO culture because they thought it was alien. It was a small being that was found, I think, in the Atacama Desert. It was a small.
Oh yeah, I remember hearing about that.
And it was a big thing, and it was, I think, Stephen Greer got involved, and they were going to do DNA testing. I think they got to the point they did DNA testing, and they found out like one side had like either the male or the female part of the DNA had like what might be or is known as like human DNA, but that there was like another unknown factor in this being, and they were trying to say like, oh well, it's just because like I forget what exactly like the conclusion of this was, but I mean, if you take a look at the actual being, I mean, the thing's small, and it looks like something out of like an alien movie. It really does.
Right, it had a very elongated head, right?
Yeah. It definitely doesn't. I'm not saying, oh, this was like a deformation or whatever. And then I think there was arguments made against that. Like you said, sometimes they find out the plates of the skull are fully formed, and if it's a child, that you would still have the soft plates. They don't fully form yet in the skull in any sort of known human or humanoid. So interesting that they found like a being like this, and there was also. Let's see.
Well, it reminds me too of the Nazca mummies, and I write about them in the book.
Yes,
and there's still a lot of controversy. In fact, I just saw an article just the other day. They're in Mexico. I think they were doing testing on one, and the scientists basically said this being has different types of fingerprints. So if they were hoaxed, if these things were hoaxed, like how would the hoaxers like make fingerprints, right?
Yeah,
like
that would preserve themselves.
Yes.
Yeah. They had three fingers, you know, and they
very long fingers.
There was only 3 of them, right?
3, yep, 3, and then on the 3 toes as well. But the whole Nazca mummy thing, there's a lot of different types. There's some of them that look like a hybrid, almost a cross between Homo sapien and almost reptilian.
Yeah.
And then you have some that are very, very reptilian-like.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a chapter on them in my book, and that was, gosh, I was researching them probably 7-8 years ago, and I knew, JP, I'm like, holy smokes, like these are going to be super controversial down the road.
For sure.
Like there's, and sure enough, there's still a lot of controversy raging.
I remember from your book, this is just off the top of my head because this wasn't in the notes for that we were going to talk about today, but they actually found like tendons on like the legs that like didn't match known hominids. Like they were threaded up through different areas of the bones.
Yep.
And it's not something that we have. It's not the way that our structure of our body are laid out. So it was like a different, definitely like a different species of hominid than.
And some of them, they've done DNA testing on them and they have elements of Homo sapien DNA, but then there's other parts of the DNA that match no species on the planet.
I think I was thinking about that. It's like, do they have elements of Homo sapien, or do we have elements? Because we're using us as like the mark of like anything, all that is.
Yeah, we're the reference point, right? But
what if the reality is we're not the reference point? What if they're the reference point, and we have some of their DNA in us? So you know, this would be a, you know, again. Why is there so much effort and time and energy put into, you know, suppressing all of the UAP phenomenon going on in the modern day? And there certainly is a ton of it. It doesn't take, you don't have to go far to look into it. So to think about like the ancient astronaut theory, where what do they do about a body that they haven't gotten their hands on? Somebody else discovered them and they're not human, and you basically just shut your mouth.
Yeah. Now there's a lot of hearings and stuff. There's a lot, JP. Because you follow this a lot more than I do with the UAP stuff. But there's a lot of current hearings going on, right, about disclosure and the release of this information in our intelligence services, and
they tried to force it.
Engineered craft.
They tried to force it. What senator was it? There was a Democrat and a Republican. I don't want to cite anybody's name because it was the UAP Disclosure Act, and it was something. Let me see if I can look it up. Senators that proposed UAP Disclosure Act. I know what it was. It was a 2003 act, and it was to basically force the hand of these defense intelligence agencies and these defense contractors, to force them, if you have any biologics, if you have any technology, you have to inform this panel that we're going to form, that you have to come forward with it. So Chuck Schumer, it was a Republican, and it was a Democrat, and Mike Rounds, so Democratic from New York. They proposed this Unidentified Phenomenon Disclosure Act. It was supposed to be into the fiscal year of 2024, and there was a big bomb dropped in this act, and it was like, hey, roundabout way, there was like legal jargon to say, like, if you're a private organization, like i.e. if you're a defense contractor and you have any of this technology that might be associated with UAPs, which would be like recovered ship technology, a body that was maybe pulled out of one of these ships that was recovered, which is the big chatter that's been coming forward that this is real. You know, like I said, I've known about Roswell for, you know, almost the better part of 20 years now. And, you know, that definitely really happened. So I'm a huge proponent that really went down. So all the other situations like Roswell's that happened, like, where's that going? Like the little beings or like little types of creatures that were pulled out of these. And they put it in there. They put it in the Disclosure Act. Like, hey, if you have it, you have to disclose this to the panel that you're talking about. And apparently one of the senators that would have to have signed this is in the area of one of these defense contractors, his jurisdiction. And that senator, funny enough, came forward and said, like, I think we should strike this from the bill. We actually have to for national security reasons. So when they actually passed the bill or put it forward, it was like modified in one of the big bombshells that would have been in it is like forcing the hand of defense contractors to have to talk about if they have this, that they have to bring it forward. And they basically pulled it out of the bill, like in a silent way. Like, well, that was the best part of the bill. Like the UAP Disclosure Act is that you're going to disclose.
You have
UAPs. But somehow, in a way, leveraging national security up under that monster of a story, you pitched it off the bill to say, like, oh, well, so now it's not really the real UFP Disclosure Act. It's a modified version through the national security of this country and the defense contractors. So, but anyhow, so that's something that was real. But moving forward into the little people, like some of the what the Mayans called the Puas is Puas. They were little people that were skilled metal workers that lived in the Yucatan region of Mexico. Scandinavians also claimed that they were skilled metal workers, that they had small people who were skilled metal workers.
Dwarves. They called them dwarves. And we get, like, if you're into the J.R.R. Tolkien, the Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, that kind of stuff. I mean, you can see a lot of these legends, these tales told from different cultures of these little people, of these dwarves that lived underground. They were metal workers. They knew how to make weapons and things like that. So it's kind of a common thing throughout the world. I was on a podcast with my friend Bodon. He's out of the Ukraine. And we did a show and we were talking about the little people. This was a few years ago. And he, over there, like when he was a kid and he was being brought up, they were called like brownies. That's what they called them, brownies. And what his parents would make him do is at night they would leave a little bit of food out for the brownies. Yeah, because they didn't want him to get upset and cause mischief in the house. So in his culture in Ukraine, they believe that these little beings live. And if you, again, just like Native American culture, if you upset them, then it was going to bring problems, bad luck to your household. And the Native American people too, they would leave food offerings for them. They would leave tobacco. It's very, very interesting. And
the Mohegan and the Pokut tribes believed that little people called Makiawisug, who carved symbols on rocks, and they said to have magical powers that turn them invisible. That seemed to be a reoccurring theme too. These Native Americans thought they had the power to become invisible. That was interesting. Particular areas, kind of hot spots in North America where I found a lot of information on little people was Tennessee. A lot of things on the little people, art newspaper articles about skeletons, and also in North Carolina as well, in the tribes over there. And back in the 40s or 50s, there's a university over there in North Carolina where they were doing renovations. And they found a series of tunnels underneath the college that were, they were like 3 feet tall, a little bit higher than 3 feet. And they had the arches, like man-made arches in the tunnels. But these tunnels were not big enough for a normal person to walk through. You had to be like a little person. And in that area, the tribes were talking about the little people. And apparently there were skeletons. There were some skeletal remains found underneath that university. And one of them was a tiny skull. And one of the university professors, I guess, got his hands on it and used it as a paperweight on his desk in his class. And finally, I think he had like a visiting archaeologist that saw this little skull and said, where did you get this at? And he said, well, they found it on the grounds here. And he said, yeah, it's just a child's skull. And the archaeologist looked at her, or maybe she was a paleontologist. She looked at the skull and said, this is not a child. This is a fully grown adult. I could tell by the teeth. And I noticed that the teeth that you had on that model skull too, they didn't seem like they had any canines. Were there any canines on that skull, or were those all flat teeth? Those were all like molar
They're
type
all
teeth,
flat. Yeah, molar
which
type
would be
teeth.
an indication of that this would be a herbivore, not necessarily, or is that
not necessarily, because they did. I mean, they found Komodo dragons
you were
and
saying
other
like things they
meat
would hunt?
You know, they would hunt. So yeah, they were obviously probably eating plants and meat as well.
Interesting though. Like, is that
Yeah.
so? That's not necessarily a mark of something that's a carnivore. It doesn't have to have canines or like stabbing teeth. It could have all flat molar stuff.
However, that's interesting you bring it up, JP, because there's another thing I write about in my book, a discovery of a mummy. They called him Pedro back in the 1930s.
Yes,
there were some miners.
I took notes on that.
Yeah, if you want to get into that, because
that was really interesting.
Little person had sharp teeth.
Huh.
That one had sharp
teeth. And you said there was meat found in his stomach. So yeah, he
undigested meat.
But this was he was a small mummified. When standing, they surmised he would have been about 14 inches tall, and when sitting,
pretty small,
super small, 6.5 inches tall. And they found him in 1934 in the San Pedro Mountains of Wyoming. And X-rays, at least the ones you provided in the book, validated that this was a real being.
Yep.
And also, he had damage to his spine, skull, and broken bones. So there's a possibility that this creature or this being met a violent end.
Yep.
They found him in 1934, but it's hard to surmise how long ago without radiocarbon dating how old this being actually is. I remember not too long ago they found it was the wildest story. I think it was in the past like 10, 15 years. They found a 14 or 16-year-old female down in South America somewhere up at the top of a mountain, frozen. And they surmised that they put her up there as a sacrifice. She was like one of these human sacrifices.
Yep.
They brought her up there. They gave her some sort of like cocktail. They drugged her.
Yep.
And eventually she just passed out in a sitting position and succumbed to the cold. And she stayed up there for like 600 years.
Wow.
And when they brought her down to this lab, I could look for these pictures. It almost looked like she could have fallen asleep and frozen to death like 6 months ago. She was wearing the same clothes, had everything was intact, was just frozen.
Wow.
Just a young female frozen wearing, and you're like, yo, she's 600 years old. It's wild to think about that when you like actually look at what the condition she was when they found her, because it was just so arid and cold there for so many years. It never thaws out, so she remained frozen basically for 600 years or whatever, however many hundreds of years. So it's especially with a mummy, something in a cave, something that is preserved correctly. I mean, we could be talking 100 years, we could be talking 500 years, we could be talking 5,000 years. I mean, we don't really know, like, unless there was any sort of radiocarbon dating done, right? Was there?
Yeah, so an interesting aspect to that discovering of Pedro, when they found him, he was on a ledge and he was sitting cross-legged.
Okay.
And in that position, cross-legged position, is a very like spiritual type position. Someone pointed that out to me when we were talking about this before.
Almost like meditation.
He goes, that's interesting that they found it in a cross-legged position.
Now,
and like you said, go ahead.
Is it surmised that like this is obviously a mummy, so this is something that was done to this body after he was killed? So it's not like he died and just like sat in that position and just happened to like dry out and like they found him like that. No, this is something that died. Somebody brought him to that cave and somebody mummified him. They said there's some gelatinous material that was on his skin that like And obviously from the X-ray, because a while back, maybe about 10, 15 years ago, there was this weird, funny-looking bat creature that was found down in Mexico, I think.
They called it the fairy or something.
The fairy.
It had like wings.
And it had wings, and it had these things that looked like BBs inside of it. When they X-rayed it, and they weren't sure. I think eventually they found out it was like an amalgamation of like...
It was pieced together.
2 or 3 different dead animals that they basically like made this carcass out of, and they like... like they used like pins or something like that in the inside to hold this thing together, and it looked like a freak of nature type of thing, like a small hominid with wings and like big fangs. It was like a mix of like a different bunch of animals. So they were like wondering, like, could this small creature be something like that, like made from organic material, but the X-rays kind of showed that it had an intact skeleton, right?
It had an intact skeleton. In fact, it had undigested meat in its stomach.
Undigested meat? That's wild.
Yeah. So Yeah, I mean, until it's brought forth, no one knows its whereabouts. It kind of disappeared. The chain of custody disappeared in I think the 80s.
80s,
And
yeah.
so no one knows. Yeah, no one knows where it's at. And so I guess there's like a $10,000 reward to
Yeah.
find it.
They
And
originally
then
had it in like
to
a
allow
circus
DNA.
sideshow, right?
Yep.
That was
Yep.
what would happen with it. And then in the
Yep.
1940s, Ivan Goodman bought Pedro. He died in 1950, and a man named Leonard Waller bought him, and then he died in the 1980s. So what did Leonard Waller do with this, thing? So Little Man Mine is still there where Pedro was found. I think to this day, you had cited this in your book. Because this is so interesting, because you have this unknown, small, almost like half goblin, half human looking creature that's this little man that was
tiny,
well preserved, and it was more than likely real based on the x-rays. It's still this huge enigma, and if somebody can get their hands on this creature and then do some DNA testing to try to get some further scientific investigation, so there's still a $10,000 reward for anybody that comes forward with any information on where Pedro is these days. Obviously this man, if this thing was that well prized, probably wouldn't have just thrown him out in the trash. It was probably sitting somewhere in storage, probably sitting in somebody's attic somewhere,
Private collector. Yeah, who knows? Yeah, it's very interesting where that could be, or if it'll ever turn up.
If it'll ever turn up, yeah. So
yeah.
But anyhow, very, very mysterious that we have, again, like once in a while, these bodies that come up, and they become like these marks of like, what are we looking at? Is this something that's a different form of human? Is this something a different race of being? Is this something we just did this X Factor type of situation? But I know for a while, again, circling kind of back around to the UFO community, there was this big thing down in there's a cemetery down in Texas, I believe, somewhere. And,
is that where the allegedly an alien body was buried?
There's a crash. It's 1897. There was a UFO crash.
Yeah,
and it was so real.
Aurora. Is it Aurora?
That's it.
Yeah.
And there was actually a article. They knew who the judge was. I think his name was Judge Proctor. They knew where the windmill was. This object crashed into this windmill, and everybody on scene said when the object crashed, it broke apart. And there was a small little pilot who was 3 feet tall. And eventually they buried this pilot in a local cemetery, and they knew exactly where the cemetery was. And for years they were trying to get researchers went over there with ground penetrating radar, and they said it looks like there's something in here. They took pieces of the ship and they buried it, and they even put a little headstone with a little picture of a saucer on it. But eventually somebody robbed the saucer, so they didn't know where the headstone was, and someone said with the radar they still knew where the grave was. And the town multiple times said, you're not going to violate a sacred space by doing any sort of archaeological digs. It would have been that simple. And then they furthered up. They followed up with research with like either like ground penetrating radar or like metal detector, and they said that it looked like somebody dug the grave up, maybe unbeknownst to somebody in the middle of the night one night. Somebody came and drug it because there's nothing in there anymore. So, but apparently the body of this pilot was put in this grave, and pieces of the ship were put down in a well, I think on Judge Proctor's property. And the man that moved in there afterwards was drinking from that water, and he started getting all these strange anomalies on his hand, these bubbles that were popping up. Yeah, all sorts of weird stuff that was going on with him because he was drinking from that water where they threw a piece of that metal down into, probably some sort of unknown metal poisoning or something like that. But who knows? But circling back around to what you were saying with the Bigfoots, you know, but more like a small foot, let's say.
Well, okay. So you just reminded me, JP. So there's also these little people in parts of Indonesia that are almost like little miniature versions of Bigfoot. They call them Ibu Gogu, which means grandmother that eats everything.
Yes.
And it's a very small being that is almost like Sasquatch-like in terms of looking like it's a combination of an ape and a man with fur. And in fact, I have a casting of a footprint of one of these Ibu Gogu from Indonesia. This is just a replica casting, and you could see how small the foot is.
Look at that. That's so cool. So cool. Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, they became a local pest to villagers within 60 miles of the Lian Boao cave even kidnapping one of their children at one point and killing them.
Yep.
So the villagers, this is what reminded me of the giants of Lovelock Cave. The villagers cornered them and burned them in a cave.
Yes.
And then
absolutely,
the remaining inhabitants could have retreated further into the jungle. And I noted that this sounds similar to how the ending of these giants of Lovelock Cave ended.
Yes.
The local villagers, the local inhabitants got sick and tired of the antics of these, other type of creatures that were living there, and they just had enough of it. So they wound up just killing them.
The straw that broke the camel's back, right? When you start taking the children, the villagers kept leaving food out for them.
Yeah,
and they would devour everything, and it got to the point where that wasn't enough, and then they started sneaking in the village and raiding the huts or whatever, and then it got to the point where they took a child. And then that was the straw that broke the camel's back.
And when they took the child, did the beings know? Were they intelligent enough to know, like, not just to kill and eat the child? Were they using it as like leveraged for more stuff? Like, what exactly?
That's a very good question. I in the research that I've done, I don't know if that was the case, JP, or if they killed the child and ate it, or if they kidnapped the child in hopes that they would get more food.
They could leverage more food out of that. Say. Like, hey, I got your kid now. You better start paying up.
I never thought of it like that. But if they were if they were intelligent enough to have tools and whatnot, they could have done that. I mean, that's a possibility that I hadn't thought of before.
Interesting. Again, kind of circling back around to what my original thought when I brought a small foot or short person. There's another hominid named the orang pendek.
Yep.
And it's a small ape-like creature seen in Indonesia.
Yes.
Could be a modified version, or maybe it could be the same thing as the Ibu Gogo, because they're all
very, very similar. Very similar.
Allegedly, Marco Polo was presented with one when he visited Indonesia in 1295 AD.
That's what they say.
Yeah, and
he brought it back to Spain, I think. But
wow.
I think, if I remember correctly, I believe it might have died during travel. But I'm not. I'm not sure if I'm getting that mixed up.
And there was a sighting.
Yeah, you have these legends.
Yeah, but the difference between this one and a lot of these other ones is upwards of 1994. Not one, but two people came forward, and one of them was a pendek or orang pendek researcher and former journalist named Debbie Martyr, and another one, wildlife photographer Jeremy Holder, claims to have seen one also in the same forest in 1994, the Kerinci National Forest. So this is a recent, I would say a fairly recent sighting when we're talking about these other situations where, like, we don't know if these things are alive, or 100 years ago or 500 years ago, or, when did these things actually exist? Native Americans 200, 300, 400 years ago. This is 1994. I mean, I was alive in 1994. You were alive in 1994.
Yep.
So this is modern.
Here's something that's going to blow your mind, JP, that you brought this up, because I had a gentleman that I'd communicated with about a year ago. He lives in Indiana, and he's done research into the giants, and now he's really interested in the little people. So he finally reaches back out to me, and I call him last night, get a hold of him, and he goes, Floyd, I'm doing research on the little people at these mound sites. The Native Americans talk about them, and there's been a number of recent sightings of these little people around these mound sites. And I said, Will, this is crazy. I said, I'm doing, literally tomorrow morning, I'm doing a show, a podcast with my friend JP on the little people. And he goes, you're kidding me. And he goes, Floyd, the last time we were out in this area, there was this strange, like, tree, this knotted up tree, and it has kind of a hole in it. And he said, this tree has all these holes. And we were out there filming. He said, I caught on camera, it looks like there was something small in the tree, and you can see the eyeball looking through the hole of this tree. And he goes, I got to send you this photograph that I took. And he goes, I also have some video footage that I plan on sending you. And he sent me this picture. And if you look at it closely, it looks like a little eyeball peering through this tree, and not a big person could fit inside this tree. It would have to be a very small person.
Yeah.
And so he started showing this to other people, and I think even some native people around that area, and they said, "Oh yeah, that was a little person.
Wow.
There was a little person in the tree, and they were watching you."
Does he know?
So he said,
does he know where this tree is? Is it something that he'd be able to go back there? I mean, you don't want to. Be a researcher. You don't want to be disrespectful, because I think that's where the line crosses. Where, like, you know, you're saying maybe not so much. I don't know anything about this mysticism or whatever supernatural powers these beings might have, but I'm just saying, just being a compassionate human being, knowing that, like, you know, it's good to do research, and like this is one of the big things I'm learning now with one of the big tenets of the master's program I'm currently in. I'm currently working towards a master's degree in clinical mental health. One of the big tenets of being a clinical mental health a therapist or psychologist or whatever the term would be you don't do any harm, you do no harm. So whatever it is that you need to find, and whatever it is that you're looking for, the primary tenet that you start off with is, however you have to get to that end goal, is you do no harm. So as a researcher and as somebody, you don't want to like be disrespectful. Let's say this was something, absolutely, even that could change the world. Like you said, I think you made this quote in your book, like you would wonder, even if you Floyd Wills came across a situation where you say, oh wow, I'm 100%. I stumbled across this area and this cave system where I think there's a group of these beings living. Like, you make that national news. You make that you go national with that story. You know, these beings, it's never going to be the same for them if you're telling the truth, because there's going to be a storm of researchers, scientists. Like, it's, if they even survive whatever the next wave of human beings coming after them are going to be, just through research and stuff. So, you know, even if he did stumble across something like this, like, you know, like I said, it would be interesting for him to go back there and see if he could follow up and see if there was anything more to it. Maybe go back to the same tree, see if he can get any of the same results. See if he can do any sort of experiment on his own time to see if he could figure out how to make some sort of a communication bridge with whatever might be. He's been
leaving them things. And I've heard Bigfoot researchers do that as well. They call them gifts, and they leave different things. And he said, and I'm not specific on what he's leaving them because he didn't get into that, but he said he's seen some strange things, like objects that he's left. Like, we're gone, and then another object, something strange, turned up
right there in the same spot. That's interesting. That's very interesting. You know, so something with the intelligence to know that you're leaving them a gift. And you said where was this occurring? Just, you don't have to give
this is in Indiana.
Okay,
Indiana. In Indiana, there's a number of mound sites there.
Okay.
And, and so the locality where my friend Will lives,
very cool.
These mounds, these ancient Native American mound sites.
The fact that he stumbled across this, and you're researching this right now too, and that
he says there's people recently that said they've seen little people, like they've sighted these little people.
Wow.
In or around these mounds.
Yeah. You know, it doesn't shock me. Like I said, I'm actually, the more I look into it, I said, one of my big proponents is I believe there's some truth to whatever's going on out there in the southwest at this Dulce base. I believe that there.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Maybe it makes that situation. I'm not saying this situation, but it's just to say it could happen. It makes for the perfect crime because it's on an Indian reservation.
Yeah, and you can't go
there.
Limited to what you do.
Extremely limited access being non-Native American. So that boxes out, like, let's say what percentage of the country is Native American that is allowed on this reservation. Probably, I would say a fraction of a percent of this country. It wouldn't shock me if it was like 0.000, like a very small fraction of is even allowed on that land. And they were talking probably dozens of miles of square miles of just nothingness in the desert. There's this mountain, very difficult terrain when you get up there. So it makes for almost, if there was some sort of population that lived under this mountain, that lived there for tens of thousands of years, and that have, come from another civilization or throughout the history of this planet, maybe crossed paths with other civilizations where they had access to higher technologies. Yeah. It would almost be the perfect crime to be able to have it happen there, because no prying eyes. And then even if the prying eyes are allowed on, even their access would be extremely limited. So I'm just saying that, like, for me and the research I've done, it looks to be where there's tons of smoke, there's probably fire. So there seems to be some sort of truth. So, like, it always kind of keeps my mind open to, like, if it could happen there on this planet, where else?
Absolutely.
There's a place out in Australia, they talk about similar types of activity. And if it's happening there, well, then where else? I mean, could there be other places in the United States that are cave systems that go down deep into the earth, hundreds of miles or dozens of miles, that are untapped cave systems that are well protected? If you're talking about smaller people, maybe they have access to certain areas that you or I wouldn't be able to wiggle into.
That's right.
Them being only 2 or 3 feet tall. You or I would come to that and be like, hey, A, you can't get in there. B, even if I could worm or wiggle in there, I wouldn't do it because it could be a death sentence for me. So I'm not playing games. Like, I don't want to turn out to be like that guy. I don't know if you heard this almost like, I wouldn't say like Final Destination, but I would say like freaky accidents. Like, he was exploring a cave with his friends and he found a turn, and his friend said, "Oh, you make a left and it opens him to a bigger cave." Accidentally made a right, and it bifurcated into another area, which happened to be a dead end. Now he's upside down in this dead end, wiggling down deeper and deeper and worming himself. And he got stuck. And it got to the point they're like, okay, well, we're going to pull you out. And they're like, well, that's not working. They're like, all right, we're going to hook ropes up to you and get some levers outside to pull you out. Like, well, the way that you're wedged in there, like, we'd have to snap your legs into jelly, and then maybe we'd be able to rip you out of there. And it got to the point they're just like, we can get tools down in here, but we'd have to drill around it. And by the time we do that, we're talking like days and days of like extensive drilling, and like, they're just like, you can't survive for that long completely upside down. The human body, like, it's good. Like, I even have one of these, like the teeter hang-ups. It's good to do some decompression, but to be upside down for,
oh my gosh,
24, 36, 48, your heart starts to be able to lose the ability to pump correctly. You start to get fluid buildup in your lungs, probably something similar, I would imagine, to like congestive heart failure, which is why people who go through a CHF start to get fluid buildup. Because I learned through being an EMT is that when you the pressure, why you always have a diastolic and what is it, systolic and diastolic pressure. The lower number is the constant pressure that's always in your artery. There's a lower base level of pressure in your artery that just holds. It's like a pipe having pressure. But the higher level is when the bolus of blood is pumped from your aorta downward throughout your aorta, and that's the main pressure of the blood that flows through your body and then returns on the veins. But people who have congestive heart failure, let's say you've had a heart attack and you lose 40% of that's what happens when you have a heart attack. The longer you go with a clot, the more heart tissue dies, and you don't get that heart tissue back. So the longer that you don't get treatment for a heart attack, time equals heart muscle equals potential disability when you recover from that. So let's say you had a heart attack and you didn't know, you thought it was indigestion, but you got to the hospital 4 hours later. You say, all right, well, 35% of your heart is now of your aorta. So your body starts to lose the ability to keep the back pressure that would come through the aorta if you're not constantly keeping the down pressure. So you need a certain amount of down pressure to keep that blood pressure, the system in your body rolling correctly. And if you don't have that aorta pumping the front pressure down, eventually the blood starts to back up into the aorta. And eventually that blood, it's not the chambers of the heart aren't intended to catch the blood on the backside. So it starts to go back into the lungs, and you start getting like swelling around the heart, and you'll get fluid in the lungs, and you eventually, if it gets really bad, people start coughing up blood. So that's like a similar thing. So imagine like somebody stuck upside down.
That's a living hell. That's like, I couldn't think of a worse way to die than that.
And they basically came up with a plan, and the plan was like, let him think he's going to be saved.
Yeah.
And I think they were just telling him, hey, listen, man, it's only going to be a couple hours longer.
Yeah.
In a situation like that, I think they basically just said to him, like, hey, like, you're going to get help. It's on the way. Oh, why isn't it here yet? Oh, it's coming. They said like another hour. Yeah. Eventually, he's just going to pass out. Like what are you going to do? What are you going to tell him in his last minutes of life? Like, listen, man, you're not going to make this. Like, there's no way. There's no way. So it's crazy, like, to think about. But like, who'd want to put him in some sense? So I always say to myself, like, when it comes to caves, the long and short of it, when it comes to caves and being like adventurous, they're dangerous, and like people do get killed in caves. Yeah. So it's like, imagine if there was spots in caves that go deep down the planet, and a small person, 2 feet, 3 feet, 16 inches, the Pedro, You know, if he was a type of small person standing up, he said he was, 16 and a half inches?
Yeah,
they
tiny.
certainly could get into places down into cave systems that you and I and a normal sized person would never be able to get into. So it does leave the door open for the possibility that, like, oh, well, if it wasn't found, we found everything in 2025. I'm 100% that you haven't. When I see interviews with the granddaughter of President Eisenhower going on the record stating that she also believes that Dulce is a real base, not being talked about on mainstream media, not being talked about anywhere in academia, which could be literally a civilization of people who have advanced technology living under a mountain range off of a Indian reservation. It leaves the door open for the possibility that, like, what else is going on in this world, in our cave systems underground, when it comes to Mount Shasta and these interactions with these elders, when it comes to Admiral Byrd when he did this operation. What was this? High jump or whatever.
Antarctica?
Up in Antarctica, and he flew into some hole, and he was visited by these enlightened elders that basically said, hey, this is the message we have for humanity and your destruction you could be causing on this planet with your proliferation of nuclear weapons. Like, where is the truth, like when it comes to these anecdotal stories of your friends seeing a Bigfoot witnessed by 3 people, and it's like something to the fact where a family member has even said, like, hey, son, pay attention to what you're staring at right now, because this is something that you will never see again the rest of your life. And this is definitely not, I'm looking at it right now. You're looking at it. He's looking at it. We're seeing something that doesn't match any record of any known creature that should be living on this planet right now. This is truly a mystery, what you're staring at. Same thing that Jesse Marcel did to his son, who turned out to be a respected flight surgeon. That he was the guy that saw the original wreck from Roswell. He rushed home the morning that he had a pickup truck full of this debris from this UFO crash. He woke his son up at 3 o'clock in the morning and his wife and said, come here. And he goes, I have to show you something that you are never going to see again the rest of your life. Pay attention to what I'm showing you, son. And he laid it all out on the kitchen floor and said, I know what I'm looking at. Like, I'm smart enough to know that this isn't something that was manufactured here on this planet. So, like, you have these situations that happen in these X Factor type of situations. Again, there was a sighting of an ape-like man with a round face and a flat skull top, like a flat head,
was in Vietnam,
climbing up a tree, seen by GI Larry Wilson when he was piloting a helicopter in 1971. So you have these sightings, and again and again and again. Not only throughout history, you have the evidence of, like, the print that you showed us, the skull that you have. It's been proven that these Hobbit type things or beings did exist. And they've even been named, with the name, was it Homo florensis? So
that's what they call the Flores Hobbits. Yep.
They even have scientific names. So it has happened throughout history. It's happened across the planet, and it could currently be happening right now in the United States. And, which makes for a really interesting conversation. So is there anything else? Because I know we covered quite a bit from, and I just said, I made one comment when I was taking my notes. I said, because up to 100,000 years ago, comparing with the situation that we do know about, there was Neanderthal or the Denisovan hybrid. Yeah. So we know that this could have been a possibility or one of many type of hybrids. So there may be some sort of a hybrid race that, like, broke off,
So true, JP. I mean, we've really covered a lot of stuff from the Native American traditions into the more modern day sightings, like my friend Will doing research saying, I'm interviewing people that have actually seen these little people. I met a lady that encountered with her niece a little person in the woods, and when they got close enough to it, they could see through it. So again, we've talked about the physical aspects of these beings. We've talked about the supernatural. Are they physical? Are they supernatural? Are they a combination of the two? Now, we obviously know that there's at least an aspect to them that is physical because we have them in the archaeological record. We've been talking about that with the Flores Hobbit. So, but then there's a whole aspect of the supernatural nature, which I do believe there's elements of the supernatural. So I think this has been a great show. We've covered a lot of information, if people are more interested in learning about my research, about my work, please check out my book, The Red-Haired Giants of Lovelock Cave and Other Ancient Mysteries. You can get it off of bookbaby.com. I would encourage you to do that because I'm a self-published author, and that company supports self-published authors. You can also get my books on Amazon as well. Great. I do have a website, redhairedgiants.com, and it has a lot more information about my work if you're interested. So it's been awesome, JP. I was so glad to connect with you again. Let's plan for another show sometime.
For sure. And Floyd, I'm looking forward to, do you have any idea of a future book? Or are you still just kind of toying around with your research right now?
I'm still toying around with my research, but it will be more information on the giants, the little people. I want to get into research of the aspect of the Sasquatch and their possible connection to the Nephilim, to the giants.
Very cool.
I believe they might be a remnant of the Nephilim, of the giants that still exist to this day.
Okay, excellent.
And also, too, on pre-Columbian contact, there's a lot of sites that I've been to that show evidence here in North America that there was a presence here long before Columbus.
Yes.
The Phoenicians, possibly the Egyptians were here. So, yeah, a lot of different mysteries to research. So.
Very cool, Floyd. Again, check out Floyd's book. Check out his Amazon book, baby, which is because he's an independent researcher. This is all Floyd doing everything on his own. He's it would be helpful to support him on his endeavors so he can do more cool future research. Certainly appreciate having you on here, Floyd. And
thanks for having me back, JP.
Hopefully, again, sometime soon in the future, we will have you back again. And for everybody else, thank you again, Floyd. Everybody else, I hope everybody stays well. Floyd, take it easy.
Take it easy, JP. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Yep. Stay well.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you all for listening to this episode, and thank you everyone who has chosen a life of service. This is not just military, fire, police, and EMS, but also anyone who has taken their talents and passions and used them for the service and betterment of others and this world. I'm not saying goodbye. I'm saying until next time. This is your host, @NotMedia, JP signing off. Stay well, everyone.